Wednesday, July 22nd. Breakfast: baguette, French toast with an apricot sauce. The night before, I cut baguettes into 3-inch chunks and let them soak until morning in a mixture of 4 eggs, 3 cups of milk, some vanilla, and a little nutmeg. By morning, all the liquid had been absorbed so that each piece of bread had to be lifted onto the buttered baking sheet with a slotted spoon. I baked them in a preheated 400-degree Fahrenheit oven until they puffed up and became a golden brown. Melting down a cup of apricot preserves with 2 ground fresh apricots, a little sugar, and a splash of drambuie, I simmered the mix with a few tablespoons of water until it became a sauce, then poured it over the buttered French toast. Over breakfast, Letty returned to the question of the chair. "Should we call Monsieur Dumont?" she asked. "He's on vacation, remember?" Jack reminded her. Helmut gritted his teeth in penitent apprehension. Later, as I looked out the upstairs window, I saw the herd of cows from the farm by the river. "Hey, Helmut," I called down into the garden where he was dragging an old canvas lawn chair from the storage cave. "Some of the cows are standing up, some are lying down. What do you think that means?" "Possibility of scattered showers," he replied. He set the chair up in the middle of the lawn and plopped himself down, immediately ripping through the canvas and ending up on the ground. Eyes wide, he looked up at me, trying not to laugh, shaking his head from side to side. "Uh-oh, another petite problem," he said. Letty came out to the terrace to set the table for lunch, viewed the goings-on, and sitting down, defeatedly poured herself a glass of wine, muttering, "Oh, the hell with it." Lunch: tzatziki and mixed salad, 1996 Vin d'Alsace Riesling. For this meal, we fixed sliced cucumbers mixed in yogurt and seasoned with salt, pepper, and garlic. There was a salad of lettuce, tomatoes, marinated green beans, and avocados, and a dressing made with the juice of 2 lemons, about a 1/4 cup of corn oil, a good tablespoon of chopped garlic, a teaspoon or so of sugar, salt, and fresh crushed green peppercorns, mixed into 2 cups of a rich sour cream. With it, we ate a thick, crusted wheat bread and drank a bottle of 1996 Vin d'Alsace Riesling. The rest of the afternoon was spent in preparation for our first guests. Simone and Abelard rang the gate bell punctually at 4 o'clock. We had set a table of fresh figs, apple slices, camembert cheese from Normandy, the spicy hot Moroccan olives, mousse de canard, a honey brandy called hydromel, some goat cheese and herbed cream cheese, and 1 leftover stuffed eggplant cut into bite-sized pieces. Simone presented us with a basket of gifts, a loaf of packaged bread with a label that read Méthode Traditionnelle, Domaine de Fleury, a bottle of Bordeaux Chesnel, and a container of La Véritable Rillette du Mans, shredded pork like we bought at the charcuterie the day we arrived, which she announced, quote, was a specialty of the region, end of quote. Simone, a native of Tours, worked in administration in a hospital there. Abelard, an editor, was in advertising in Martinique, living part-time in 7 years, part-time on the island. It was his dream to ride a Harley-Davidson across Route 66 from Washington, D.C. to California and down into Mexico. He spoke with such eagerness for this adventure that I wondered if his enthusiasm had begun with Marlon Brando's The Wild One, a cult hit in France in the 50s, and all those Hollywood movies that romanticize the image of the lonely rider, hair flying in the wind as he turns his, quote, dust-laden metal steed into the eternal sunset of lonely but heroic adventure, end of quote. I was about to suggest Easy Rider, but remembering everyone gets shot to death in the end, felt it might cast a pall on the pleasantries of the moment, to say nothing of Abelard's dream. Expounding on the drama of negotiating precipitous cliffs, I urged Abelard to cycle Big Sur. La mer, oh, la mer, I said, trying to convey the color of the Pacific. Unable to think of the French word for blue, I resorted to Italian. Azure mer, I said. Abelard looked puzzled, then suddenly understood. Ah, bleu, like your eyes, he said with perfect aplomb. Ha, those French. It was one of the most charming compliments I had ever received. He had immediately endeared himself to me, even if I felt a little stupid for not having known the French word for blue was bleu. Our new friends were very winning. They spoke a little English, but with Letty's and Mona's translations, we were able to keep the conversation flowing. We drank brandy and wine, ate the roulettes and cheese and figs, and passed a pleasant couple of hours in the bright light of the warm early evening. We were disappointed to learn that they were leaving Friday for a 2-week stay in Morocco and they wouldn't be back in time for us to see them again. As they left, Simone affectionately kissed each of us 4 times, twice on each cheek. Like Paris, she explained, and they bid us adieu. Mona locked the gate after them and walked back up the drive to the terrace. We've had company. We're here a week and we've already had company. I know, Madeleine said. I'm beginning to feel like we live here. Well, we are living here, Helmut added. It's like heaven, Jack chimed in with just a hint of saccharine. There was a long pause. There are no exits in heaven, I said. Dinner. Chicken vegetable soup with homemade noodles. Strawberries with sugar and creme fraiche. Later, we sat down to a light supper of soup made from last night's leftover chicken. After picking all of the meat from the carcasses, I boiled the bones to make a stock, discarded them and added several thinly sliced carrots, a couple of cups of white wine, about a cup of celery chopped small, and 4 minced green onions. I seasoned the soup with salt and pepper, a little garlic, and some fresh thyme. I broke an egg into a cup, added about 2 tablespoons of flour, and mixed it to the consistency of molasses. Bringing the soup to a rolling boil, I took a large wooden spoon and began stirring until I had formed a circling eddy. Then I slowly dripped the egg and flour mixture into the edge of the boiling whirlpool, letting the motion cook the mixture into small dumpling-like noodles. My grandmother had taught me how to make these when I was 5. She called them kluskis, Polish noodles. For dessert, we again ate strawberries with sugar and creme fraiche. After dinner, we sat on the terrace enjoying the evening color. Did you notice there are no screens for the windows? Helmut asked. I did, I replied. We noticed that the first day we were here. And nothing bites you, Madeleine marveled. That's because there are no flies or mosquitoes in this area, Helmut continued sagely. And those little moths that fly in at night fly right out as soon as you turn off the light. How perfect. Thursday, July 23rd. This morning, after our usual feast of warm baguettes, croissants, and butter, Letty, Jack, Mona, and I set out to find the chateau of Chenonceau. Helmut and Madeleine had found 2 old bikes in the caves and, wanting to take a bike ride, declined to join our excursion. It was wonderful to see the villages and towns en route, and we might have enjoyed a stop at any of them, but instead elected to press on and arrive at the chateau as early as possible. I was particularly sorrowful to have forgone a stop at the cloister, where the renowned pastry Pets de Non is believed to have had its origin. Legend has it that a novice preparing show pastry was caught off guard by an unexpected burst of flatulence and accidentally dropped a piece of the dough into a deep fat, thus producing a wonderfully light and airy delicacy. When naming the new pastry, a souffle fritter filled with the cream or jam, one of the nuns called it Pet de Non, nun's fart. The ancient plane trees lining the allée along which you approach the chateau arched over us like the nave of a great cathedral. Entering the palace grounds, we decided it would be wise to eat now just before the lunch hour began. The crowds were already gathering at what had once been the royal stables, since converted into public dining rooms. I held a table out in the busy courtyard while the others went inside to order. The crowd at Chenonceau was the most international I had seen since arriving in France. There was a tour bus from Morocco that arrived soon after we did. A stream of interesting-looking people descended from the bus and sat down near us. Speaking at first what I thought was Arabic, they lapsed into another language that sounded like Hebrew, and from there they jumped into French, punctuated by an occasional English sentence. As people passed our table carrying trays of food, I recognized Japanese, Spanish, Italian, German, and of course English. American and some British, being spoken as well. It was a great feeling to be a part of this mix. Both Jack and I had chicken and a sweet and sour tomato sauce with peppers and onions. Letty had a seafood dish, and Mona, fearing she had been eating too much, lunched on a lovely tomato and avocado salad with a mayonnaise dressing. From where we sat eating, I could look across the formal gardens first planted by Catherine de Medici to the wonderful gallery that spans the Cher, the same river on which our own village was located. Small bateaux errants, rowboats, glided around huge stone pilings which housed the chateau's 3 kitchens, conveniently serviced by their access to the water. The potted orange trees along the perimeter of the garden reminded me of the story I'd heard about another de Medici, the famous Marie. While the 4 of us ate, I related the tale. It seems the queen was down with a terrible illness, a malady, as they used to say, and the royal physicians called for the cooks and ordered them to simmer oranges with sugar as a remedy. The cooks began to refer to the mixture as Marie's malade, which eventually boiled down, no pun intended, to marmalade. From its earliest days, Checonceau was noted for its sumptuous cuisine. Culinary legend tells us that when Marie de Medici came to live in France as the queen to Henry IV, she was so distressed by French cooking that she sent back to Italy for her own chefs to teach the French how to cook. But Catherine arrived in France 30 years before Marie was even born, and it was in her time that the castle gained its reputation for fine cooking. It was remarkable to think about this as I stood in the enormous double-leveled kitchens of the castle with their scores of copper pots, pans, molds, and tubs, the different sinks carved out of stone, the huge fireplaces, and the great wheel that brought in water from the river. If Chenonceau had a reputation for great food, Catherine must have had something to do with it, perhaps bringing her own chefs from Florence long before Marie arrived. Of all the chateaux we visited, Chenonceau certainly had the most convenient, most workable, and best equipped kitchen, supporting my speculation that it was actually Catherine and not Marie who could claim the legend. Here, possibly, I thought, is the very kitchen where those chefs cooked and the cuisine that we know as French really began. We spent that afternoon happily touring this beautiful edifice. On our way out, we wedged our way through the crowds into the small gift shop at the bottom of the Watchman's Tower. Jack and I were in and out in about 30 seconds. I was hoping to find orange marmalade. But Mona and Letty managed to spend a good half hour in search of that indefinable treasure all tourists seek in a foreign country. Mona, alas, came away with something else. On the ride back to Savonnières, she began to feel somewhat uncomfortable. Reviewing what we had eaten that afternoon, Letty remembered, "Wasn't there a mayonnaise dressing on your salad?" "Oh God, please don't say that word," Mona pleaded, her hands held protectively over her stomach. "I know that's what made me sick." By the time we reached the house, her stomach was reeling, consulting the essential green book under the heading Medical Emergencies. We discovered that a doctor lived just next door, sharing a common wall with us. We had passed the house many times. Inside the gates, a border of boxwood hedges enclosed a small, elegant courtyard with a gravel parking space and a perfectly manicured lawn. Mona rang the bell at the gate and was invited into the front room that served as an office. The doctor listened attentively, gave her some pills, and wrote out a prescription for the local pharmacy, advising her to, quote, eat small bowls of very ripe bananas, shredded peeled apples, cooked starchy vegetables, rice, some pasta, and drink lots of water. "How about oranges?" I asked. "Does he want me to boil down some oranges with sugar for you?" Ignoring my query, Mona began telling us what a nice man the doctor was and marveling that he had charged her only 120 francs, about $20 in American money. We were genuinely amazed and agreed, what a wonderful place. A person can not only see a doctor when they need one, but can actually afford to be sick in this country. Dinner. Sausage and red wine ragout, baguettes, chocolate with hazelnuts. This evening I prepared a lovely stew of blood and white sausages sautéed in olive oil and tomato paste. When the tomato paste was browned, I added potatoes, string beans, cauliflower, shallots, green onions, garlic, fresh thyme, and chives. About a half cup of flour stirred well into the mix to form a kind of roux with the vegetables. About a cup of water to unstick the pot. half a bottle of red wine, and some salt and pepper. I let it simmer, covered, until the potatoes were tender to the touch of a fork. We ate the stew with leftover baguettes for breakfast. We ate the stew with leftover baguettes from breakfast, sopping up the juices with the bread. For dessert, we had chocolate bars with hazelnuts. I say we, but actually Mona had a tasty bowl of unseasoned rice with a little shredded apple and some water. France is not the place to be on a restricted diet. We steered her away from the hazelnut chocolate. She insisted, however, that the doctor told her she should drink a glass of red wine. Or two. Friday, July 24th. By this time, the morning routine was firmly established. Set the table, put on the coffee, and head for the patisserie. Often I would get a variety of flavored croissants instead of plain ones, but the baguette was a must. It was an unceasingly perfect way to start the day. Some days we just stayed at the house, painting, washing clothes, cooking, gardening, maybe going out for a short walk around town. There was never any great rush to get out onto the road to, quote, see something, end of quote. Across the rue from us were 5 little houses all joined together, inhabited by people who looked almost as old as their houses. By the second week, these neighbors had begun to know us, although I'm certain from the moment we arrived they were aware of our every move. The little dog who came out onto the windowsill to yell at us that first day now recognized and looked forward to seeing Letty, who stopped to pet him every time she passed. Monsieur Dick was his name. One day on the street, the little dog came up to Letty, tail wagging, little snout pointed up, eyes half closed the way dogs do when they are blissed out, and rubbed against her leg. Letty bent down and began scratching him under the chin. "I am amazed," the old man who was his master commented. "He never takes to strangers like this. He must really like you." Suddenly, the little dog turned around twice and lifted one leg in the direction of Letty's shoe. "Oh, Monsieur Dick," the old man called. "Non, non, non." Obediently, the little dog put his leg down, chagrined, I'm certain, at being deprived of his affectionate gesture of claiming Letty as his territory. And slowly, tail between his legs, headed back into the house, turning once to give the old man a dirty look over his shoulder. The old man and his wife, a couple well into their 80s, had met during the Second World War in one of the local caves, where they had taken shelter from the bombardment. She was a refugee from the north of France, and he was in the Greek army. Eventually, they fell in love, and when the war was over, they returned to Savonnières, married, and moved into the little house across the street from us, where they have since lived. Every evening, Monsieur Dick would leave his house and walk a few doors up the street to visit with the aged lady who lived alone in the last house. He'd stay for an hour or so, chew on a little bone or dog biscuit, and then she'd open the door for him to return. The old man would be waiting at his open door, and the two people would have a conversation as Monsieur Dick ambled the short distance, sniffing a step here, following a scent there. Letty and Mona, both dog owners, stopped in a hardware store one day to purchase one of the "Beware of the Dog" signs they had seen on so many fences and gates, which in French actually says, "Vicious dog on guard." The salesperson told them they could no longer buy those signs. They had, in fact, been taken off the market because it had been deemed, quote, unfair to make a negative judgment on the dog, end of quote. It was the only incidence of, quote, political correctness, end of quote, I saw in France. Naturally, I was sympathetic. Lunch. Mousse de canard, avocado, ripe tomatoes, and onion salad. Celeriac remoulade, camembert and chèvre. Baguettes, petite Suisses with ripe peaches. Sparkling Vouvray. There are moments when you feel that life has actually come together. Lunch this day was, for me, one of those moments. The weather was perfect, as it had been since we got there. Clear blue sky, no humidity, temperature in the low 80s, bright sun, and a soft warm breeze. We set the table on the terrace with the blue and white limoges. There were fresh baguettes, mousse de canard, ripe avocados, sliced red tomatoes, and onions. I had grated up a celeriac root and made a remoulade by mixing it with a cup and a quarter mayonnaise, half a cup of Dijon mustard, 2 tablespoons of crushed garlic, the juice of a lemon, and a generous twist of fresh ground black pepper. There were 2 kinds of camembert, some local goat cheese, and of course a great hunk of that wonderful butter. We drank a bottle of sparkling Vouvray, cold and just barely sweet. And for dessert, we ate petite Suisses with a little sugar and some juicy ripe peaches. Sitting on the terrace in the sunshine beneath the boxwood umbrella with music playing and all of us together so pleased and happy, eating wonderful food, drinking champagne, we became, as sometimes happens when people live together, an ideal companionship that in its harmony remains in the memory as a relic of simple happiness. That afternoon, Letty, Mona, and Madeline walked into the village to mail some postcards. On a building set back from the street toward the center of town, they noticed a sign advertising Miel à vendre, honey for sale, and decided to stop. For 20 francs, they got a quart-sized plastic container of thick, cloudy honey. Back at the house, we gleefully removed the lid for our first taste. Given the abundance of lavender in the region, I had hoped the honey might carry its scent. The thought of lavender honey was almost euphoric to me. "Does it smell like lavender?" I asked hopefully. Mona inhaled deeply. Puzzled, she gave the container a second, suspicious sniff. "Goats," she said. "Does this smell like goats to you?" We passed the container from nose to nose. "I'll be darned. Ha! It does smell like a goat. Yep, that's goat all right." We began to consider different explanations for this mystery. Could the bees have come from a field where goats were grazing? Helmut questioned. "Lying on the flowers that the bees gather the nectar from," he continued lamely. "That might give the flowers a sort of goat flavor." Our skepticism quickly rejected this possibility. Maybe the goats make honey in France? Maybe the container had been used to store goat's milk and the smell never went away? I don't know, I never smell the goat when I drink goat's milk. That's a point. We never did discover why the honey, strong and delicious, nonetheless had the smell of goat. However, Mona's olfactory discovery had ruined the honey for me, and I never ate it again. She'll tell you the reverse, that I was the one who said it smelled like goats and ruined the honey for her. But since she was still under the doctor's care, I cannot hold her accountable for remembering the truth. Later on that same afternoon, Madeline and Helmut returned from a long bike ride and announced that they had found the train station on the other side of the river about a mile out of town. They had watched a train stop to discharge passengers but had seen no sign of a ticket office. And on the way back, stopped at the town hall to inquire where the tickets might be purchased. Madeline approached the desk. "Est-ce que y a un chemin à Tours?" she inquired, thinking she had asked, "Is there a train to Tours?" but actually asking, "Is there a road to Tours?" Puzzled, the official glanced out the window as if for confirmation, peered over his glasses, and answered a politely supercilious, "Mais oui, madame." I'm going to reread that because it was such a good detail. Puzzled, the official glanced out the window as if for confirmation, peered over his glasses, and answered a politely supercilious, "Mais oui, madame." At a nearby desk, a clerk had stopped writing, his pen suspended in midair. Madeline pressed on. "S'il vous plaît, puis-je acter un billet pour le chemin?" Please, can I buy a ticket for the road? Bewildered now, the official shook his head and, indicating the road outside the window, explained, "Madame, il ne faut pas de billet pour utiliser les chemins." Madame, you don't need a ticket to use the roads. Puzzled now herself, but realizing she must have used the wrong French word for train, Madeline began pulling an imaginary cord and offered a toot-toot. "Ah, le train!" exclaimed the official, the word being the same in both tongues. The misunderstanding cleared up now. The clerk returned to what he was doing as the patient official explained to an abashed Madeline that she could either pay on board or, on the return, buy a round-trip ticket at the station in Tours. Helmet, who had endured her reproaches about the chair fiasco, sat back with a look of contented vindication as she related this latest embarrassing miscommunication. We roared with laughter and appreciation of her dilemma. All of us had, at one time or another, suffered similar conversational confusions. One day, while walking along a country road, I passed a farm where there grew an enormous hedge of lavender. It must have been 5 feet high. Thinking I was commenting on how beautiful it looked, I said to the woman working in the yard there, "Votre lavage est joli." She nodded a gracious merci, but quickly retreated into the house. Lavande is the word for lavender, Mona told me, as I was recounting the story to her later. Lavage means laundry. You told the woman her wash was beautiful. Huh? I thought for a moment, surprised at the information. There was no wash, I admitted. Well then, said Mona, matter-of-factly. The woman probably thought you were nuts. Dinner, turkey cutlets baked in a white wine and Emmenthal cream sauce, new potatoes fried with cabbage, green beans sautéed in garlic and olive oil, fresh strawberries on vanilla ice cream, Kir Royales. Our friend Manuel had called to say he was due to arrive that afternoon from Paris, and I wanted to make a lovely dinner in honor of his visit. I'd had the butcher slice 7 paper-thin cutlets from a turkey breast, which I dipped in egg and milk, coated with a mixture of ground baguette crumbs and hard Italian cheese, and sautéed in butter and olive oil. After they were browned on both sides, I laid them in a baking dish and covered them with a sauce of 3 cups of whole milk mixed with Emmenthal cheese, shallots, salt and pepper, 1 cup of white wine, and with the leftover breadcrumbs and egg wash added for a thickening, I put the dish into a 350-degree Fahrenheit oven and baked them for 20 minutes. Unfortunately, the sauce cooked too long and separated, but it was easy to remedy. Removing the cutlets onto a platter, I poured the liquid into the blender, whizzed it back into a cream sauce, and poured it over the turkey. I served thinly sliced new potatoes, fried with chopped cabbage and butter, salt and pepper, and fresh string beans sautéed in olive oil and garlic. Any green vegetable is made most desirable by simply sautéing it in some olive oil, butter and garlic, salt, and black pepper. You want to keep the fire a tad less than moderate, and you want to stir or shake the pan often. If the vegetable scotches, as my grandmother used to say, now popularly referred to as caramelized, all the better, but be forewarned. It is a close call between caramelizing and burning.